بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله الطيبين وأصحابه المنتخبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان وهدى إلى يوم الدين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا كريم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وسدد لساني واهدي قلبي بحق سيدنا Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. As we continue our study of Imam al-Haddad's introduction to his book, The Complete Summons and General Reminder, Ad-Da'watu At-Tamma wa Tadhkiratu Al-Amma, we're now going to look at some of the delusions and some of the thoughts that can come up in the minds of people who are engaging in ad-da'wa ila Allah, who are inviting and calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But before we get into that topic, just a brief recap of what we covered in lesson number 6 is that Imam al-Haddad reminded us and informed us that the ummah becomes afflicted with tribulations when those who invite to Allah and call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fall short in fulfilling that duty. And Imam al-Haddad tells us that specifically so that we can roll up our sleeves and we can be of service to the ummah and to all of creation. But when we do that, as he's going to tell us now, these certain delusions and satanic whisperings can arise for the one engaging in ad-da'wa ila Allah. And the first is, how can I teach others? How can I be someone conveying this sacred knowledge when I'm not putting what I'm learning into practice, when I myself am not acting upon the knowledge that I have acquired? So how can I teach that to others? So Imam al-Haddad, he says that the person might think to himself or herself, I do not implement what I know, so how can I teach and invite others to it when those who do so, who call others to do something that they themselves are not doing, are threatened with severe punishments, as is well known? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لِمَ تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ كَبُرَ مَقْتًا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. O believers, why do you say what you do not do? How despicable it is in the sight of Allah that you say what you do not do. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us of being of those people. So this is only to further confirm the delusion that arises in the mind. So a person might say, because of this warning, I shouldn't teach anyone and I shouldn't engage in da'wah. So what is the answer that Imam al-Haddad gives us to this particular delusion? He says, to such a person it should be said, to teach knowledge is part of putting it into practice. And he who teaches without himself practicing what he has learned is much better than the one who neither teaches nor puts it into practice, and who is at least teaching others and conveying that knowledge is better than someone who does not put it into practice and does not convey it and spread that knowledge to others. So there are 3 obligations that come with knowledge. The first is to learn that knowledge and to seek it. That's an obligation. طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم. Seeking knowledge is an obligation on every Muslim. So to seek it is an obligation. To act upon that knowledge, to put it into practice, is another obligation. And then the third obligation is to teach that knowledge to others. So we have to seek it, we have to implement it and put it into practice, and we have to share that knowledge with others. So a person who teaches it to others at least fulfills that obligation. And Imam al-Haddad, he says, if you cannot do all aspects of good, then at least do some of it. And he says, without a doubt, threats against he who teaches without practicing what he teaches apply even more so to one who neither practices nor teaches others. Allah has imposed 2 obligations upon those who have knowledge. In the case of the first person, he fulfilled one and failed to fulfill the other. The one who is conveying that knowledge while falling short in putting it into practice, has fulfilled one obligation, the obligation of conveying, while he has failed to fulfill the other. The other person, the second person, who neither teaches nor puts it into practice, has failed to fulfill both obligations, thereby becoming more worthy of these threats and more deserving of punishment. So you have to teach others. And at the same time, Imam al-Haddad is not saying that it's okay that you're not implementing your knowledge. No, you have to strive to implement that knowledge and also convey it to others. But if you are falling short and this delusion arises in one's mind, the person says, oh, I can't do that because I have not put it into practice myself, so I will remain quiet and allow others to be in a state of heedlessness and ignorance. No, you have to convey it to them. That's better than remaining quiet and not fulfilling those two obligations. And while you are teaching them, you are actually addressing your own self. That you say, as I teach this to others, as I convey this knowledge, I will use that as an opportunity to remind myself, and I will intend that I am speaking to my own self first and foremost, and then conveying this knowledge to others. So this is the first delusion that can arise in the mind of a person who is inviting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the answer is, you have an obligation to act upon it, and you have an obligation to teach. So make sure that you teach others, and at the same time, you strive to remind yourself and implement that knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. So that's the answer to the first delusion. Then Imam al-Haddad tells us of the second delusion, which is that calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that belongs to the people of lofty and noble rank, the imams of this deen, and the leaders of the ummah. And I'm not one of those people. I'm not at that level. I'm not at that rank as they are, the people of guidance and religion. So because I'm not one of those people, and I don't ever think I will be of those people, I cannot invite to Allah. I cannot engage in da'wah. Who do I think I am? This is something that is reserved for the most elect of the ummah. Imam al-Haddad said that this is a delusion, and his answer to understanding it properly is as follows. His feelings of insignificance and inadequacy, his disdain of his own self and his humility then lead him to refrain from calling to Allah or taking on the responsibility of guiding others. So someone at just a superficial level might say, oh, this is good. This is the proper response. You have to be humble. You should not be arrogant and have vanity and have ujub and think, of yourself, highly of yourself. So this is humility. Imam al-Haddad continues and he says, he imagines this to be praiseworthy modesty and that he knows his own limits and humbly stops at them. Such thoughts are erroneous delusions, for the truth is never an obstacle to the truth, and good never hinders other forms of good. This is a principle that we can take, that the truth is never an obstacle to the truth, and good never hinders other types of good. So Imam al-Haddad is saying humility does not stand in the way of teaching others and conveying sacred knowledge. So this is only the appearance. This is an erroneous delusion. This is not real, true humility in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, one has to be humble and has to see even those people that he or she is teaching as better than oneself, that I am not better than them. You have to have humility as you are conveying sacred knowledge, and that you see those people, you say, maybe those people who at this point might not have the knowledge that Allah has given me, but they will use this knowledge and perhaps they will become people of a lofty rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have a far higher place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than I will. And maybe as our teachers teach us, that we should actually, when we're intending to call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should have the intention that those people that we are teaching will intercede for us on the day of resurrection, and that they will be better than us. And they might say, oh, that person taught me some of the aspects of my deen and I benefited from them. Oh Allah, on this day when you've given me permission to intercede on behalf of certain people, I ask you to enter them into paradise on my behalf. That we should have that intention with those people who are teaching us, even if they're children. You never know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will select to be of His righteous servants. So we are not better than them, but we still have the responsibility to convey this knowledge to others. Imam al-Haddad then says, he should strive and do his utmost to call to guidance, show the way to goodness while maintaining humility and modesty. Simultaneously in one's heart, having this humility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having fear and awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, confessing to his own shortcomings and thinking little of his own nafs. That is the state of the caller to Allah, the state of heart that he or she should have when calling others to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being shy before Allah, but also realizing this is a duty which I am fulfilling in order to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's good pleasure. Not because I am of the imams of guidance and of the lofty rank of the great people of this ummah, but because I am following their path and I need what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them. I need Allah's forgiveness. I need His mercy, and I need to be granted His good pleasure. So we have to strive to help others and also maintain humility at the same time. Imam al-Haddad then says, this is what perfection is, and this is the way to acquire the attributes of the people who are not swayed by the devil's insinuations, nor are they diverted by delusions and deceptions, or the devil's passing off evil as something that is good. They're not swayed by that. So the believer, the one who is taking the path of nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who seeks knowledge, the one who wants the highest levels of nearness to Allah, and the one who wants to take on the responsibility left behind by the Prophet ﷺ of conveying and serving the ummah, that person always seeks higher degrees with Allah and a loftier rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah's giving is endless and infinite. So they're not affected by the whisperings of the shaitan that say, this is your limit of what you can seek with Allah. We remain humble and we seek higher levels with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we realize that good never gets in the way of other forms of goodness. So we don't let these delusions stop us from inviting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam al-Haddad has now told us, if and when they come up, we now know how to respond to them, and we now know the proper balance that we have to have in every situation. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us to be in the lofty degrees of those who are of service to the ummah, those who are the carriers of sacred knowledge, people of humility, people of brokenness and neediness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and of the most blessed members of the ummah for the sake of the ummah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us that purely through His grace, and to grant us His gifts and favors, because He is the most generous subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah to make us firm upon this path, and that He grants us the highest degrees of honor and belovedness to Him and to His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the last words that we utter when we leave this world, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, wa sallallahu ta'ala ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.